I'm not the kind of guy who slashes tires or screams in parking lots. I file reports, answer emails, and double-check numbers until my eyes burn. That's who I thought I was anyway. So when my boss started trying to quietly erase me from the company, I did the most me thing possible. I sold the $12.5 million property he thought was his personal cash machine and made sure he didn't see a cent of it. It didn't start with some big betrayal. It started with a chair. For 8 years, my desk sat just outside the glass wall of my boss's corner office. Same gray carpet, same humming AC, same view of downtown that everyone pretended not to care about, but always stared at when they thought no one was watching. I was the guy you went to when a project was on fire. If a timeline slipped, if a contractor threatened to walk, if an investor got twitchy about the numbers, they sent it to me. Michael, you're my closer, my boss Richard liked to say, clapping me on the shoulder like he just knighted me with a stapler. You take the mess, you make it clean. Translation, I took responsibility for everyone else's screw-ups and made them look intentional. We were a mid-sized commercial real estate firm. Office parks, mixed-use buildings, the occasional shiny statement project downtown to make the website look expensive. Richard owned the company. He liked people to remember that. His name was on the door, on the contracts, on the golf shirts he gave the senior managers every Christmas. My name was on spreadsheets. I didn't hate it. I'm not going to pretend I was some oppressed genius. I made good money, had a decent apartment, drove a truck that didn't rattle when it idled. I liked walking sites with a hard hat on and feeling like the grown-ups trusted me with something big and complicated. The work was stressful, but it made sense. Richard made less and less sense as the years went on. He used to be in the trenches with us. The first few years, he knew every tenant by name. He'd walk a half-finished floor in a suit and actually ask about duct rooting. Then the money got bigger, the projects fancier, and suddenly he was more interested in investors' birthdays and which restaurant still had a private room free on Friday nights. That's when the chair moved. One Monday I came in and my desk was gone. Not gone, exactly. Relocated. Someone had rolled my entire setup, chair, monitors, little fake plant my sister gave me, away from outside his office and down the hall, next to the copy room. Space optimization, HR said when I asked. We're creating a quiet work zone near the corner office. The quiet work zone was 2 junior analysts and a ficus. I watched a new glass-walled executive lounge appear where my desk had been. Leather chairs, tiny fridge, some abstract art that looked like a toddler had lost an argument with a highlighter. Richard stopped saying my closer after that. He started saying my operations guy, like I was a utility closet with a pulse. At first I told myself it didn't matter. My screens worked the same. My phone rang the same. But when people walked past now, they didn't stop to ask, "Hey, are you free for a quick question?" They went straight into his glass lounge, closed the door, and left me out in the hallway staring at the copier status screen. The real shift came with the building. It was a 12-story glass and steel thing on the edge of downtown. Retail on the bottom, offices and a rooftop terrace. Appraised north of $12.5 million, depending on the market mood that week. It was our crown jewel, the one Richard liked to drop into conversations. You know that building on 8th, he'd say at parties, thumb hooked in his belt like a rancher? Yeah, that's ours. It wasn't ours. It belonged to a holding company made up of investors. But that distinction blurred fast after the third scotch. I'd shepherded that project from the first zoning hearing. I knew every anchor tenant, every clause in every lease. When the city changed the parking minimums mid-construction, I was the one who pulled 3 late-night calls and got the variance approved. When the contractor's steel supplier went under, I found another one in 48 hours. So when a rumor started that we might sell the building, it didn't surprise me that investors were excited. What surprised me was how carefully I wasn't mentioned in any of those emails. The first meeting about the potential sale happened off-site. I found out because someone accidentally copied me on a calendar invite. Strategic Options Discussion, 8th Street Asset, the subject line said. Attendees, Richard, our CFO, outside counsel, 2 investor reps. No, Michael. I walked into Richard's office doorway that afternoon, file in hand. You want me to prep anything for the 8th Street meeting tomorrow? He didn't look up from his screen. What meeting? The Strategic Options one, for the asset. I held up my phone. He smiled then, that slow practice smile he used when he was about to feed you something he knew tasted like garbage. Oh, that. It's just high level. Big picture. Don't worry about it. I handle the day-to-day. If they start asking detailed questions, they won't. He cut in. They're looking at macro numbers. Yield. Capitalization. I've got it. He hadn't said we've got it. He'd said I've got it. Little things piled up after that. Access I'd always had suddenly required approval. Financial folders I used daily were moved to a restricted drive. On calls, when I spoke, Richard would talk over me or mute his mic and say, "Let me take this one, Mike," in that tone people use when a kid is trying to explain taxes. The day I realized it wasn't paranoia was the day of the emailed error. It was a Tuesday, gray and forgettable, the kind of day where the sky looks like unbaked bread. I was halfway through updating a tenant improvement budget when an email from Richard pinged my inbox with that little red exclamation mark. Subject, urgent, explanation needed. The body was short. Michael, the investor group has flagged a discrepancy in the 8th Street operating budget, specifically a misallocated $80,000 line item under deferred maintenance. This appears to be from your last revision. We need a clear explanation for this, quickly. This kind of sloppiness is unacceptable, especially at this stage. I stared at it for a full minute. I hadn't touched the 8th Street operating budget in over a month. We'd finalized it together in his office, line by line. I knew that because I remembered the take-out boxes we'd pushed aside to make room for the printouts. I pulled the file. The line item was there. $180,000 tagged under deferred maintenance, dated a week ago, modified by M. Hartwell. Except I hadn't modified it. I checked the version history. The system said my username had made the change at 11:37 p.m. last Thursday. That was interesting because at 11:37 p.m. last Thursday I'd been in my apartment, holding a lukewarm beer, watching a game I couldn't even remember now. It came back with the answer in 2 hours after I walked down and asked them, very calmly, to check logins. Yeah, your account was active from home at that time, the guy told me, scrolling. Remote login. I wasn't logged in, I said. He shrugged. Then someone was, with your credentials. That should have been the moment where everything snapped, where I marched into Richard's office and threw a chair through his stupid glass wall. Instead, I took a picture of the audit log with my phone, thanked IT, and went back to my desk by the copier. At 4:15 p.m., Richard called me in. He was standing by the window when I walked in, hands in his pockets, like a benevolent king inspecting his city. The 8th Street building was a faint outline in the distance if you knew where to look. Close the door, he said. I did. He didn't offer me a seat, but I took one anyway. This isn't the first time investors have questioned our numbers, he began, still looking out. Normally I can smooth that over, but when the discrepancy has your name on it, it puts me in a difficult position. It's not my discrepancy, I said. Someone used my login. I've got IT logs. He finally turned. Are you saying someone's framing you? There was amusement in his voice, like I'd just suggested maybe ghosts did it. I'm saying the system shows remote access when I wasn't logged in, I replied. We can track the IP. He waved a hand. Tech details don't matter to them. They see your name. They see sloppiness. They start questioning my oversight. Then tell them the truth, I said. For a second, the air between us went very still. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, like I was a dog that had forgotten it wasn't supposed to bark. The truth, he repeated slowly, is that I put my reputation on people I can trust. People who don't make me have to explain things. Lately, I'm not sure you understand the position you're putting me in. I've cleaned up your position for 8 years, I said before I could stop myself. My voice didn't rise, it just got tighter. On every project, including 8th Street. He smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. You're getting emotional. That's not like you, Mike. Having my name attached to numbers I didn't touch is not emotional, I said. It's career suicide. He walked around to his desk, sat, and folded his hands. The conversation was over for him. For me, it was just starting. Here's what we're going to do, he said. I'll tell the investors I've addressed it internally. You'll send them a short email taking responsibility for the oversight and assuring them it won't happen again. Then, for the time being, you'll step back from the 8th Street file while we finalize the sale. My ears caught one word and wouldn't let it go. Ah, sale? We're in advanced talks, he said like it was no big deal. I'll handle the details. You've got a lot on your plate right now. There it was. No performance review, no warning, no conversation about development or support. Just a neat little setup. I take the blame. He takes the building. I'm not sending that email, I said quietly. The smile dropped completely then. For the first time in 8 years, he looked at me like I was not a tool, not an asset, but an obstacle. Michael, he said, if you can't own your mistakes, maybe this isn't the right place for you anymore. He thought he was making a threat. I didn't know it yet, but all he'd really done in that moment was give me permission to stop treating his problems like mine. The next morning started with silence, the kind that doesn't feel peaceful, just empty. I walked into the office and felt the shift immediately. People didn't look at me the same way, not hostile, not sympathetic, just waiting, like they'd been told to stand by for instructions about what my existence meant now. My access card still worked. My computer still logged in. But 3 folders I used every day were suddenly nowhere to be found. Permission required, the pop-up said, cheerful as a slap. I sat there for a minute, staring at the screen, trying to decide whether I should laugh or just get up and walk out, because it was so obvious now. There wasn't even any finesse to it. No subtle distancing, no drip of small slights. Richard had flipped the switch. I wasn't being phased out. I was being shoved out the door, stripped piece by piece like a car left on blocks. By noon, the world had gotten smaller. Instead of meetings, I got calendar invites for internal review sessions. Instead of project updates, I got polite little notes saying, handled by our team, will update as needed. Instead of questions, people walked past me like I was a temporary hire they didn't want to invest time learning the name of. A junior analyst, someone I'd trained, actually patted my shoulder as he passed and said, hang in there, Mike. Hang in there. I wasn't sick. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being erased. Around 3, Jenna from accounting stopped by my desk, hovering like she was checking for signs of life. Did you hear? She asked. Hear what? She lowered her voice. Richard pulled the 8th Street asset into his private oversight group. I blinked. His what? You know, the little circle he uses when he doesn't want things going through standard channels. Contract review, consultant selection, bids, that stuff. I knew it. Everyone knew it. We just pretended we didn't because acknowledging it meant acknowledging the obvious. When he wanted to siphon money off a project, that's where it happened. Who's managing it now? I asked. She hesitated. Technically, him, of course. He'd shoved me aside not because I wasn't doing my job, but because I was doing it too cleanly. Later that afternoon, as people packed up to leave, I watched him through the glass wall of his executive lounge. He leaned back with his feet up, laughing on a call. His voice carried into the hall. Yeah. I told the guys we're tightening up oversight. Had to fix a budgeting mess. It's handled. No, the sale won't be delayed. I'm streamlining the team. You know how it is. Streamlining, that was me. I was the stream. I should have walked away. I should have gone home, cracked open a beer, and accepted that this is how the world works. The loudest man in the room gets the prize, and the guy who actually built it gets a pat on the head on his way out. But something happened instead, not anger, not spite. A small, clean click inside my chest, the same click you hear when a deadbolt slides into place. That night I stayed late, long after the lights in the hallway dimmed. My desk faces the glass wall, so I watched my own reflection as I opened old directories, contract databases, archived budget folders, every digital shelf I had left. I wasn't looking for dirt. I was looking for truth, the kind that doesn't need embellishment to ruin a man. And I found it fast. Invoice chains with matching sub-accounts routed through a vendor I'd never heard of. Duplicate consulting fees split across quarters. Contingency funds reclassified without explanation. A contractor with a pristine website and exactly 0 public records before 2 years ago. It all smelled wrong. But the real spark came when I dug into the operating expense roll-ups for the past year. I recognized the pattern immediately, because I'd cleaned up the same mess for other buildings. It was the exact footprint of someone building a shadow budget, slowly draining small amounts so the final gap looked like market fluctuation. No one but a person inside the company could do it, and the only person inside the company who benefited from it was Richard. I sat there for a long time, staring at a payment authorization he'd signed 6 months earlier. It was small, 40-something thousand, but the payee address matched the same vendor that had recently popped up in the 8th Street files. It was enough to connect dots, not enough to expose the whole picture. To get that, I needed all of it. I copied everything to an encrypted drive. Not a single file added or altered, just duplicated. Insurance, clarity, leverage, if it came to that. When I finally left the building, the street outside was quiet. Cool air. A few scattered lights across the boulevard. My reflection in the glass door looked like someone I hadn't met before. Someone standing completely still because moving felt dangerous. The next morning, things escalated. I walked in and found a note on my keyboard. Please see me. R. No greeting, no explanation, no context. I walked to his office. He didn't invite me to sit this time. We need to talk, he began. His tone was measured, too measured. The investors have become uneasy with some inconsistencies. They're concerned about mismanagement. I waited. And frankly, he continued, your recent performance hasn't helped. He leaned forward. This is your chance to step aside gracefully. Step aside. Meaning what? I asked. A transition package, he said smoothly. 3 months' pay. A positive recommendation. A clean exit. You sign today, and we move on. And if I don't? He gave me that same smile, the one that always meant he thought he was holding every card in the deck. Then I can't guarantee how the board will interpret your role in the irregularities. Irregularities. There it was. The knife he'd been sharpening, but that was just the beginning. He didn't know that while he was rehearsing this little speech, I'd been mapping out every suspicious line item he'd buried in our financials. He didn't know I'd spent half the night cross-referencing vendors with shell companies tied to a holding structure under his cousin's name. He didn't know I'd found receipts, literal receipts, for a consulting retainer he'd been billing to the 8th Street building while claiming he was unpaid. And he definitely didn't know that I'd found something worse. Emails he'd deleted, but not scrubbed, showing that the incoming buyer wasn't actually a buyer. They were his friends at a fund that specialized in asset flips, and he'd already negotiated a personal kickback disguised as advisory compensation. He wanted to get rid of me because I was the only loose end he couldn't control. Still, I didn't say a word. Not yet. I'll think about it, I told him. He looked almost pleased, as if he'd just placed the final brick in the wall, closing over my head. Don't take too long, he said. This opportunity doesn't stay open forever. I walked out without answering. And then, in the quiet of the hallway, with my heartbeat steady for the first time in weeks, the truth settled, deep and solid. He was right. The opportunity wouldn't stay open forever. just not in the way he thought. Because while he was busy plotting my exit, I'd already found the one thread he'd never expected me to pull. The one piece that, once removed, would take his entire structure down with it. And I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost him everything. I didn't go home after work that night. I drove to the 24-hour diner 2 blocks from my apartment, the one with sticky menus and fluorescent lights that make everyone look like they haven't slept in 3 days. I ordered coffee I didn't want, opened my laptop, and started laying out the truth. Not the emotional truth. Not the "my boss is a snake" truth. The documented truth, the kind that survives lawyers. Line by line, hour by hour, the picture became clearer. Every shell vendor, every invoice chain, every consulting fee tucked into a maintenance budget, it all formed a pattern. Not sloppy, not chaotic, intentional, precise. The kind of fraud that only works if no one in the room ever asks, "Who approved this?" But for the first time, there was someone asking. Me. Around 2 in the morning, my eyes felt gritty. The diner smelled like burnt bacon, and my laptop screen was covered in a wall of digital red flags, clear enough to show a prosecutor, clean enough to walk into an investor meeting, cold enough to end a career. I closed the laptop, and then the tiredness hit. Not physical, something else. A long, low ache under the ribs, like I'd spent 8 years pushing a boulder uphill, only to realize someone had been quietly digging a hole behind me the whole time. When I finally got home, I didn't sleep. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything Richard had built on my work, and how fast it would all collapse if even one of his investors saw what I'd seen. The next morning, I walked into the office like it was any other day, except it wasn't. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't trying to survive anymore. I was preparing. I was at my desk 10 minutes before anyone else. At 8:30, 2 investor reps arrived. Early, which never happened. They walked straight past me toward the executive lounge, except they didn't go into the lounge. They stopped at my desk. "Michael," one of them said, "do you have a moment?" I stood slowly. "Of course." They led me to a small conference room, the kind used for interviews or quiet firings. One of them closed the door gently, almost too gently, as if they were handling dangerous equipment. "Let's get to the point," the older one said. "Are you the person who manages the 8th Street asset?" I hesitated, just a breath, enough to measure what they really wanted. "I've been the primary manager since development began," I said. "All operations, budgets, tenant relations, permitting, that's me." They exchanged a glance. "We thought so." I felt something move in my chest. Not pride, not relief. Something sharper. The younger one leaned forward. "We're not naive. We know when a project is being handled by the person in the room, and when it's being handled by the person whose name is on the letterhead. So we'll ask plainly." And he did. "What's actually happening with the building?" There it was. The moment the threads connected. The moment everything Richard tried to bury started rising to the surface. I didn't give them a speech. I didn't cry or explain how I'd been pushed out. I didn't even mention the fake error pinned on me. Personal stories were emotional. Documentation was lethal. I opened my folder. 3 minutes in, both men were leaning forward, elbows on the table. 7 minutes in, the younger one muttered, "Jesus Christ." 15 minutes in, the older one shut the binder and said, "This can't be ignored." The conversation wasn't long after that. A few questions, a few clarifications. The older investor took a slow breath, then said the one sentence that rewired the rest of my life. "We'd like you to come to the buyer's meeting tomorrow, without Richard." My pulse kicked. "Is that allowed?" "It is," he replied, "when we invite you." I walked out of that room with my heart pounding, but my face still calm. The kind of calm you feel right before a car crash resolves into perfect clarity. Richard was coming down the hall when I emerged. He slowed. His smile tightened. "Well, well, early meeting." "Something like that," I said. He watched me too hard, like he was trying to read a text through frosted glass. Something in his expression flickered, a hint of unease, the first I'd ever seen, but he didn't know why yet, not until the next day. The meeting was at a hotel downtown, private suite, catered lunch, the kind of setup where deals are made by people who wear watches more expensive than my truck. I arrived 10 minutes early. Richard wasn't even invited. The buyer's team shook my hand. The investors shook my hand twice. We sat down. Discussions started. Prices, timelines, environmental compliance, tenant renewals, real work. The work I'd been doing for years while Richard practiced speeches in the mirror. Half an hour in, the lead investor leaned back and said, "Let's review the operational expense reconciliation." That was supposed to be Richard's moment, the one where he'd slip in the inflated numbers and skim off his consulting compensation. But he wasn't there, and neither were his numbers. Mine were clean, transparent, verifiable. The room went silent, the kind of silence that means someone's world is about to tilt. Then the buyer nodded. "This is solid," he said. "Let's proceed." That was the first blow. The second landed an hour later when they formally requested to finalize the sale with me as the lead representative. Not the company, not Richard, me. Because the asset wasn't owned by Richard. It was owned by the investor group, and they had decided who they trusted. Meanwhile, Richard was 5 blocks away, no doubt sitting in his glass lounge, drinking a $9 coffee, waiting for a meeting he didn't know had already replaced him. When I stepped outside after the deal discussions wrapped, the afternoon heat hit my face like a second heartbeat. I stood there for a moment, letting it settle. This wasn't victory. Not yet. This was alignment, the pieces falling into the tracks they'd always belonged on. I walked to my truck, opened the door, and sat with both hands on the steering wheel, breathing slow. For months I'd been trying to survive. Now, for the first time, I could see the end of this. The clean end. The honest end. Richard thought I was gone. I wasn't. Not even close. And what came next wasn't anger, wasn't revenge, wasn't even justice. It was gravity. I wasn't pulling anything down. I was just letting things fall. The closing meeting wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors, no theatrics. Just a long mahogany table, quiet voices, and the soft scrape of documents being signed. The kind of sound that ends chapters without ever raising its tone. I walked in with the investor group. Richard was already there. He stood when he saw us, forcing a smile that twitched at the corners. "Finally," he said, "we ready to wrap this up?" The older investor didn't smile back. He set his briefcase on the table, opened it, and slid out a folder. "Richard," he said calmly, "the sale has been completed." Richard blinked. I watched the confusion ripple across his face. Not fear yet, just irritation, like someone had started a movie without him. "What do you mean, completed?" he demanded. "We're signing today." "We already did," the investor replied. "This morning." Richard laughed, sharp and humorless. "Without me. You can't be serious." Then the younger investor spoke. "Ownership of the asset lies with us, not you. We selected a representative for the closing." Richard stared at him, then at me, slowly. "Michael," he said, like the name tasted wrong in his mouth. "You led the sale?" "I presented the operational data," I answered, steady. "The buyers accepted it." "This is unbelievable," he hissed. "You went behind my back." "No," the older investor cut in. "We looked behind your back, and we didn't like what we found." Silence. Not the kind that fills a room, the kind that empties it. Richard's shoulders stiffened. "Whatever accusations you think you have, they're not accusations." The investor tapped the folder lightly. "They're documents." Richard's face tightened. "You're making a mistake. You don't understand how complicated—" "We understand exactly how complicated you made it," the investor said. "That's why we're restructuring the firm." He turned to me. "Michael, would you step out for a moment?" I nodded, stood, and walked into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind me. I can't describe the next 10 minutes. I didn't pace. I didn't sit. I just stood with my hands in my pockets, watching the light through the frosted glass ripple as shapes moved behind it. No words carried through, just muted vibrations like someone tapping on a coffin lid from the inside. When the door finally opened, Richard came out first. His face wasn't angry. It was hollow. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, didn't even blink in my direction. He just walked down the hall, each step too careful, like he was afraid the floor might disappear if he stepped too hard, and then he was gone. Just gone. The older investor leaned out of the conference room. "Michael," he said, "come back in." I did. The table looked different now, lighter somehow. "We'll be appointing an interim operations manager while we restructure," he told me. "We'd like that to be you." I nodded slowly. No rush of pride, no adrenaline spike, just a quiet settling, like a stone finally reaching the bottom of a lake. "I can do that," I said. "We know." We talked details, timelines, responsibilities, compensation, real conversations, honest ones. When everything was done, I gathered my notes, thanked them, and stepped out into the hallway again. The office felt unfamiliar now, bigger, quiet. I walked past the glass lounge where Richard used to hold court, his voice booming through the hall. It was empty, lights off, chairs perfectly aligned and untouched, his kingdom packed up in minutes. I grabbed my jacket, my bag, and my keys from my desk. No one stopped me. No one asked questions. People glanced over, like they felt something shifting but couldn't name it. I stepped outside. Cold air, late afternoon sun slanting between buildings, the city moving with its usual rhythm, unaware that one man's empire had collapsed between breakfast and lunch. I walked to my truck, opened the door, and sat down. For a moment, I didn't start the engine. I just breathed. 8 years of being the guy behind the curtain. 8 years of keeping things upright. 8 years of being told I wasn't quite ready. And then all at once the curtain fell, and the only person still standing was the one who'd been holding up the whole damn stage. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, balanced. Some endings crash, some explode. Mine just settled. By the time I got home, the sky was turning a pale, washed-out blue. I walked inside, turned on the lamp by the window, and set my keys on the table. My apartment smelled like nothing. No stress, no burned coffee, no late-night spreadsheets. Just quiet. Real quiet. I made dinner without rushing, ate without checking my phone, sat on the couch without thinking about what tomorrow would demand from me. Then for the first time in months, maybe years, I let my shoulders drop. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't triumph. It was relief. A clean, even breath after holding it for far too long. Richard had spent years trying to build a world where everything belonged to him. I spent 1 week showing him the only thing that ever belonged to him was the downfall he created himself. And me? I wasn't his problem anymore. I wasn't his asset. I wasn't his scapegoat. I wasn't his shadow. I was just a man with a job to do. One I could finally do without being buried under someone else's greed. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let my mind go still. Some people chase glory. Some chase power. I'd spent my whole life chasing neither. All I wanted was peace. And for the first time in a long, long time, I had it.